Hello, very good day to you. Welcome to the latest Met Office Deep Dive. It's Tuesday. I'm coming to you from our headquarters here in Exeter. I'm Alex Burkill, presenter and meteorologist, and I'll be talking to you for the next 20 to 30 minutes or so about everything that's going on with the weather. Thank you for joining me. Thank you if this is your first time. Thank you if you've watched these deep dives many times before. As always, leave some comments, ask some questions. I will be responding to as many of them as I can, either later on today, or we also look at them in our weather studio live on a Friday at 12:15 on YouTube. So also watch one of those if you do ask a question, because we sometimes answer them then. Also hit the like button, hit the share button, and make sure you're subscribing so you never miss one of these updates. But let's get going. Lots to talk about. I'm going to be looking at Australia, looking up into space, but also looking at the UK. So let's start off with the UK and a quick look at the forecast as we go through the rest of this week. I'm not going to delve too much into the forecast for the UK because I don't want to tread on the toes of Honor, who'll be doing the 10-day trend tomorrow. But nonetheless, as we go through the rest of Tuesday, I'm actually going to get rid of the jet stream and instead put the rainfall on. There has been a front pushing its way southeastwards, but that's not caused too many problems. If I click play, and we actually have high pressure becoming more dominant as we go through Tuesday night and into Wednesday. So that does mean we're in for a quiet night. It's going to be a bit chilly, touch of frost in some places, could be some fog, could be quite thick, could be quite dense, could cause some problems through Wednesday morning. And yeah, temperatures in some places as low as -2, -3. But then through Wednesday itself, just going to pause it there before it goes on too far ahead. And high pressure firmly in control. So it's actually looking like a largely fine day. Lots of decent weather around. Plenty of sunshine, but towards the northwest of the UK, we do have a front that's pushing its way in, so we are going to see some wet weather arriving during the latter part of Wednesday. That front then pushes its way southeastwards as we go through Thursday, and really then the latter part of this week, Thursday, Friday, we are going to see some changeable weather. There'll be some rain pushing through, there'll be some stronger winds. Notice low pressure towards the north of the UK, so something a bit more unsettled there. And yeah, we are going to see some rain and some strong winds, particularly across northern western parts, but that rain is gradually going to push its way southeastwards as we go through Thursday and Friday as well. I think by the time that we get to Friday, it's going to be this front that pushes through, so a spell of rain across England and Wales, then showers following in behind across northern parts, but they could be quite blustery, some strong winds, gales maybe in some coastal spots, and the showers could be quite heavy. They could be quite thundery as well. I'm just going to stop it then because I want to show you some rainfall totals for this coming for the next few days. And if we look at our 24-hour rainfall totals, and this, I've picked the wrong one. I just want to look at Thursday. So this is 24 hours up until 6 o'clock Thursday evening. And really, much of England and Wales actually by this point, largely dry. I'm not really expecting the rain to have really reached here much, or not brought a huge amount anyway. Scotland and Northern Ireland, those starting to see some totals building up. And if we go ahead now looking at the 24 hours up until 6 a.m. on Friday morning, and some higher totals, you know, we could be looking at 10, 20, maybe 30 millimetres in a few places. A small chance, 20 to 40% chance perhaps of seeing around 50 millimetres over some parts of western Scotland. Not really enough to cause any major problems. We've had a lot of dry weather recently. I'll be talking about that in a second. But nonetheless, a wetter spell, definitely looking more unsettled as we go through towards the end of the week and into the weekend. And then just, yeah, darting ahead to 6 o'clock on Friday, and the 24-hour rainfall totals show that it's going to be showery, but most of us will see some rain. Could be a little bit heavy at times, but again, shouldn't cause too many issues. Just a more unsettled end to the week than we'll have had during the middle part of the week. But what happens thereafter? And let's go back to our synoptic picture. And again, I'll just put the rain on. Let's dart ahead to Saturday. And if I just go back, and so the low pressure that is bringing the blustery showers on Friday, that clears away towards the northeast. And actually, if I just pause it, we do have a bit of a ridge of high pressure building as we go through Friday night and into Saturday. So again, a quieter spell for a time. So actually, Saturday starts off relatively fine for many places. There will actually be a lot of fine weather around on Saturday. I'll talk about the forecast for Saturday in a bit more detail coming up, and you'll see why. But through Saturday, then later on, again, another system comes in from the west-northwest, similar to Thursday, Friday, really low pressure to the north of the UK, driving a front across us. So we are going to see some more rain arriving and pushing its way through. But if I just run this to the very end of the sequence, I think it comes to a stop automatically. So yeah, so a fine start on Saturday, but most of us will then see a spell of rain pushing through later. What happens though after that? And this is where there's actually pretty high uncertainty. Uncertainty levels at this time of year can often be quite high, and this is definitely no exception. This is the global model from the Met Office, and this suggests that there's another feature, another low pressure centre that's coming in from the west and could push through as we go through the second half of Sunday. High pressure towards the southwest of us, not really doing a huge amount for the time being. But the ECMWF model, European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasting, has this high pressure much more over the UK, much more further north, and so that then blocks anything coming in from the west, and so we'll see a transition to something a bit drier, a bit more settled, that little bit earlier. I think we're in pretty good agreement along with all the models that we are going to see a transition to more settled weather as we go through, well, the first week of April. I'll have more about that on our 14-day outlook, which is available on our app, so do check that out if you want to know more about this. But we're in pretty good agreement. There is more settled weather on the way as we go through next week. Actually, we'll talk about that in a bit. But it's that transition, that change from the unsettled spell that we have towards the end of this week to something more settled as we go through next week. Exactly when that's going to happen, big question marks. And I wanted to take a look as to why this question mark is so big as to what's going to happen during Sunday and into Monday. And so to do that, well, I spoke to a couple of our chief meteorologists here, and they pointed me to the Pacific Ocean. So really far away, where we've gone across the Atlantic, we've gone across North America, which is here. Here's a satellite image from earlier on today, and it's this feature here out in the Pacific that they highlighted. If I can just show you this feature here. It's an area of low pressure going through cyclogenesis, so deepening at the moment. And exactly how much this deepens and then what happens thereafter, well, it's this that's likely to be playing a part in the weather that we can expect in around 5 days' time. So it's a developing area of low pressure. But what exactly is going to happen? Well, actually, I want to show you another chart. And this was created from Dr. Alicia Ann Bentley's website. And it's quite a confusing one, so I will try and explain it. We're looking down onto the North Pole. So we're up above looking down onto the North Pole. And this is showing us what's going on at around 300 to 200 hectopascals. So I think that's around 9 to 12,000 meters up. Yeah, 9 to 12K up, roughly. And there are various things going on. Now, I'll try and point out. So here's the UK. Just over here, and then we have North America, and so then over here is the Pacific, and it's here where we have that low pressure that I mentioned and showed you earlier in the satellite imagery. And what you have is you can see these arrows spreading out, so that shows that we have divergence aloft. If we have such divergence aloft, it shows that the air is rising up, which is what we get with low pressure. So this suggests that we have got low pressure developing out in the Pacific. Now, what that's then likely to do is lead to a strengthening of the jet stream, and then this whole feature pushes its way eastwards, as we often see, pushes its way towards us. But before then, it is likely to get quite modified. So it's going to come across North America, a lot of land. It's going to come across the Rockies. High ground notoriously modifies things as well. And then it will come across and towards over the Atlantic. And exactly what it's going to do is it makes its progress towards the UK, the influence of this feature, well, that's still all to play for, and it really has marked effects on what's going to be happening in the UK. There's a high chance that we're going to see some sort of trough disruption somewhere towards Iberia as we go through the end of the weekend, early part of next week, and so then that plays a part into exactly what's going to happen towards the UK. So it's worth bearing in mind. well, we often say that, the weather that's going on around the other side of the world can influence our weather. And I think in this instance, that could really be the case. So an area of low pressure that hasn't even fully developed yet. So we don't even know exactly how intense it's going to be. But an area of low pressure out in the Pacific is likely to influence things coming towards us. And then that's likely to, or that's causing the uncertainty about what's going to happen during, Sunday into Monday and perhaps even Tuesday. But thereafter, and I mentioned the fact that there's actually strong signs for more settled weather to develop. So if we look at our pressure anomaly chart from ECMWF, and this is for the whole of next week, so from Monday the 31st of March until Monday the 7th of April, pardon me. And the pinks showing that high pressure is, or higher than average pressure, is much more likely across much of the UK. What we had is that high pressure towards the southwest of us, that's likely to build and push its way northeastwards as we go through, next week. And so we're going to see our weather settling down quite nicely. Like I said, most of the models in fairly good agreement that we're going to see this high pressure pushing in. There's that position for where we'll see the high. There are some discrepancies, but most likely high pressure pushing its way across the UK as we go through next week. Even if we go further ahead and to the following week, so from the 7th to the 14th, and yet high pressure's pushed even further northwards. It's now to the north of the UK, but nonetheless still heavily influencing our weather. So there are strong indications that we are going to see a blocking pattern around the UK or nearby to the UK as we go through, pretty deep into April. Now, why are we seeing this blocking pattern? Well, cast you back a few weeks. Sorry, I'm treading on my microphone cable. Cast you back a few weeks and we were talking about, there was rumours of, talk of sudden stratospheric warming. And it's because the stratospheric polar vortex had an early breakdown. So it always breaks down as we go towards the end of winter and into spring. But this time the breakdown happened a few weeks earlier than we often see. When the stratospheric polar vortex breaks down, because it changes the wind direction, we often see this sort of blocking pattern developing a few weeks later, around 3 weeks later, which is what we're seeing at this, as we go through next week and beyond, this blocking pattern developing. With high pressure to the north of us, that allows for an easterly to push its way across the country. If this was happening deep into winter, an easterly would be a cold direction. You've no doubt heard of Beast from the East, and so we could have some very cold air pushing its way in. Actually, at this time of year, a very different story, especially because temperatures across many parts of Europe, they're actually a little bit above average for the time of year currently. A lot of the snow has melted. And so I'm not expecting any major cold snap. In fact, actually, if I look at a few other charts, here's the rainfall anomaly chart, and it shows that, as you would expect for next week, with high pressure sitting across the UK, we have a lot of dry weather to come. So it looks like a largely fine picture. And if we look at our temperature anomaly, and it looks like it's going to be, if anything, a little bit warmer than average, with partly because of the fact that there'll be lots of dry, fine weather around, but also some relatively warm air. I haven't got the chart, but even the following week, when we have the high pressure further north and that easterly, temperatures are only around or a little bit above average, especially towards the north. And that's because, like I said, even though we are dragging in an easterly, because we're now heading deeper into spring, the land over Europe, it has more heat behind it. And if anything, temperatures are actually a bit above average for the time of year. So, yes, there's some uncertainty about what's going to happen through this weekend and the beginning of next week. How quickly we transition to this more settled spell, which is looking more likely. That's where the question marks are. But it's pretty likely that we are going to see high pressure building for next week, and for a large chunk, at least the first half of April, it looks like it's going to play a big part in the weather that we're going to have here in the UK. Like I said, Honor will have more about this for the next, of what we can expect through the next 10 days or so in the 10-day trend. Worth bearing in mind, just to go back to this, this picture here. As I mentioned, this low pressure that's developing out in the Pacific likely to, or is playing a role in our uncertainty that we have for the latter part of the weekend. This is currently developing. You'd expect it to develop in the next 12 to 24, 36 hours or so. And so with that in mind, maybe by the time Honor's doing the 10-day trend, or perhaps definitely by the time that we're doing the weekend forecast on Thursday, we should have a better understanding of what this is doing, as we should have a better understanding of what the weather's going to be doing a few days ahead, which is no great surprise. But yeah, it's just once this is really developed, then we'll know better about what's likely to happen. Even still, it will get heavily modified. Everything's going to be quite interfered with as it crosses North America, the Rockies, and then pushes its way across the Atlantic as well. Right, before we dart on to things further afield, and I did want to mention just a few things about the UK weather that we've seen recently. You're no doubt aware that we've had a lot of dry weather so far this March, and here is a map to illustrate that. This map is the totals that we've seen so far through March compared to the average for March. But this is actually the chart that was created on the 20th of March, or actually created using the data from the 1st to the 20th. So at that stage, we were 65% of the way through the month. But look how brown it is. Pretty much everywhere had significantly drier than average, or was drier than average for this stage in the month. Most places in that sub 20% of the average rainfall, and like I say, we're about 65% of the way through the month at this point, so that's kind of what you'd expect for average. So a really dry first 3 weeks of March. Then we did have some rain, so if I now show you the up-to-date chart, and this has data up to and including yesterday, so the 24th, now we're 77% of the way through the month, and still some places, particularly towards, Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, Southern England, very dry for many places. London, for example, has had around 7% of its average March rainfall at this stage, and Devon has only had around 5% of its average March rainfall so far this month. We're not at the end of the month. There is some wet weather still to come. Not loads, but there is some wet weather. So those totals are going to go up. But as you can see, it still has been remarkably dry so far this month. Not everywhere, though. Worth bearing in mind, poor Shetland, unless you really like the rain, Shetland have had around 95% of their average, so a bit more than you'd expect at this time of the month. And so it's been fairly wet up in Shetland, whilst everywhere else it's been pretty dry. Then, right, let's go across to the other side of the world, quite literally, and let's head towards Australia. Now, here's a satellite image from earlier on today, and there are a few things to bear in mind. Across parts of northern Australia, they've had some intense rainfall recently, and there's more heavy rain to come. You can see those big clouds that are developed around northern Australia and down the eastern side as well. And that's leading to some heavy rain. We're talking 300-400 millimetres in a few days, and some rivers they're bursting their banks because of how much rain that they're seeing. So some problems as a result of this. But I wanted to highlight something that's going on around the northwest of Australia. Now, off the northwest coast, there's actually a monsoon trough that's developing here. And what that's going to do, well, that could be quite important, and it's likely to develop into some sort of tropical cyclone. But exactly how it's going to develop, well, that's a big question mark. If I just show you this chart, and this is various plots from our models showing the position, but also the intensity of that feature that I just mentioned. And yes, there's quite a large spread. Some of them keep them out over the ocean, some of them push them across the land. So large spread in the position, but also a large spread in the intensity. Now, yesterday, and also even when I looked earlier on this morning, it looked like that low pressure system was going to push its way somewhere towards northwest Australia, Dampier Peninsula maybe, and make its way through. And it would be a potent feature, but actually it would intensify further as it makes its way across land due to something called the brown ocean effect. Now, usually we have our tropical storms, our tropical cyclones, they develop over the ocean, and that's where they get their energy because of the warmth, the moisture that you get over the ocean. And then once they make landfall, because they don't have that same amount of energy available, they weaken and they become less of a feature. But that's not always the case. When you get the brown ocean effect, when you have very warm land and also a lot of moisture around, which is the case that we have in this instance, then actually the feature can maintain some of its oomph. It can even intensify further for the next few hours, maybe up to a day or so after making landfall. And that looks like it could actually occur in this instance as we go through this week. Now, that's a relatively common occurrence across parts of northern Australia. It's quite sandy ground. It's a warm time of year and they've had a lot of heavy rain recently, so the ground is really saturated. So that's why the perfect ingredients were there for the brown ocean effect to occur. So for the feature to actually perhaps even intensify further as it makes its way across land. But that's now not the most likely outcome. This was a model run, I think it was a previous model run, but it does highlight some of these reds indicate a slightly more potent low pressure centre, a deeper area of low pressure. So that was always possible, and actually this now looks more likely. So I think instead of pushing its way across into the land, it's more likely now to push its way a little bit further westwards first, stay out over the ocean for a little bit longer, and so it can intensify even more over the ocean. It can deepen quite intensely. Those reds indicating, well, it's the 930 to 960 millibar hectopascal bracket. Some models hinting it could get as low as 950, 960, so a pretty deep area of low pressure, fairly severe tropical cyclone that could develop. And then it would eventually make landfall and it will bring some heavy rain, some strong winds. Now, fortunately, this part of Australia, not very populated, so the impacts won't necessarily be especially high, but nonetheless, it could be quite a potent feature. So there were signs that it could make its way inland, brown ocean effect, and then intensify a little bit further, but it wouldn't have been as intense as what it's now looking likely to be, albeit staying over the sea for a little bit longer before making its way towards land. And then if that happens, it won't, it would be so deep, the low pressure, that the brown ocean effect won't play a part in that if that comes off. So yeah, it would just then weaken as you would normally expect. Right, that's Australia done. Now what else are we talking about? Ah, yes. Here we go. Did you see this spiral in the sky? No, it's not a UFO. Well, not really. This spiral in the sky. This photo was taken by Reblin 1992 in Ormskirk. Thank you very much for letting me use it today. What was it? Well, most likely, can't be 100% sure, but most likely it was actually as a result of a SpaceX rocket that was launched in America on Monday. And now this rocket is a reusable rocket. And so what we think is that it goes up into the sky. Well, we know that bit. It goes up and it's taking something up into the atmosphere, usually a satellite, which is then going to shoot off into orbit round the Earth. So that rocket then goes up, and because it's a reusable rocket, part of the rocket, the part that isn't taking the satellite further, then comes back down to Earth. And at that point, it needs to then release the excess fuel that it has, and it's this that we're seeing. So because it's so high up in the atmosphere, that excess fuel freezes because it's so cold, and because the rocket's spinning just by the nature of its movement, that we see this spiral. So what we're actually seeing here, this spiral, is the frozen fuel from the rocket, the SpaceX rocket that was launched on Monday, and because the sun, I think this was not too long after sunset, so the sun's quite low down, so it's beaming up towards this frozen ice and then reflecting off it, and so that's why we see it. And like I said, it's because of the rotation, the spin of the rocket, that we're seeing this spiral. A lovely picture here from SHU 2600 in Wolverhampton as well, showing it, and it just is, I mean, you could see why people questioned what it was, and lots of questions were coming our way, and lots of people wondering if it was something a bit more scary. Here's another photo from Jigolton in Lancashire. But yeah, that's what we think it is. It would be nice if maybe SpaceX were able to comment and suggest exactly what was occurring, but let's see if we have that another time. Then a couple of more things that I want to end with today. I didn't want to show you just that just yet. I did that when I practiced as well, and I knew I'd do it again. But this weekend, this Saturday morning, we are going to have a solar eclipse. In the UK, it's going to be a partial solar eclipse. But yeah, we're going to have scenes similar to this. Let's show this map now. So this map is from timeanddate.com. Thank you for letting me use it, showing where the different levels of eclipse that we're going to have across different parts of the world. So towards eastern parts of Canada, that's where we're going to get the greatest eclipse. The further east you are, the less of an eclipse you are going to be. This zone that covers the UK, that's ranging from around 50% to 30%. So the further northwest you are in the UK, the more of an eclipse that you're likely to have. Whereas towards the southeast, a little bit less. Still 30%, still a large chunk taken out of the sun. The time of the eclipse is going to start around 7 minutes past 10 on Saturday morning, with the peak eclipse coming around 5 minutes past 11. And then for the next, roughly the next hour, it will start to come out the other side, so we'll see less. So there is the chance that we could witness a partial, well, it's a pretty high chance, there is going to be a partial eclipse across the UK on Saturday morning. The further northwest you are, the greater amount you'll see, ranging from 50% to 30% across the UK. With that in mind then, I said I'd look at Saturday's weather in a little bit more detail, because what are the chances weather-wise? Well, if we go back to, let's go to 11 AM, and, well, across much of England and Wales, a good deal of fine weather, 1 or 2 showers, but also some decent sunny breaks. So actually, relatively good conditions for witnessing the partial solar eclipse. Obviously, please don't look up directly at the sun, that's not good for you. But unfortunately, I mentioned towards the northwest of the UK, that's where we have the greatest eclipse happening this weekend, but also that's where we have the wettest, the windiest, the cloudiest weather. So conditions not really favourable there for seeing the solar eclipse at the moment. Worth bearing in mind, I've already been through in quite a lot of detail. There is some uncertainty about the forecast for this coming weekend, and that does play a part in the timing of this front that has been chopping and changing a little bit. So don't lose hope. That may be slowed down. It may even speed up, and we may get the clearance a little bit earlier, in which case you may still get a chance. So definitely keep an eye on this if that's something that you're interested in witnessing. Then the last thing that I wanted to leave you with today before I go is the fact that our clocks spring forward this weekend. Sunday morning, yes, we lose an hour of sleep, which is a lovely gift on Mother's Day, but we do get our lighter evenings. So our evenings will be markedly lighter as we head into British summertime. The other thing though that I wanted to mention, at this time of year, we're so close to the equinox, it was last week. At the moment, we're gaining the most amount of daylight each day, but that's going to change very soon. We're going to start to gain less and less daylight each day. So our days are going to continue to get longer, obviously, until the summer solstice in June, but actually from now on, really, we're gaining less and less daylight each day. Why is this? Well, let's try and explain it. Now, I practiced this and it went relatively well, so let's see if I managed to do it okay today. I'm just going to get up a random bit so I can draw a little graph for you. And here's my drawing tool. Let's use yellow. So why is this? Well, so the Earth is tilted on its axis. The tilt's around 23.5 degrees. And depending on the time of year, depends on where it is in its orbit around the sun, depends whether or not the northern hemisphere is tilting towards the sun or the southern hemisphere. So now we're in the, we've gone past the spring equinox, so now the northern hemisphere is tilting more to the sun. And its peak tilt in relation to the sun will be at the summer solstice. But because the Earth's orbit around the sun is relatively, it's pretty close to being circular, actually the level of tilt relative to the sun, the change in it actually follows a sine curve kind of pattern. And so if I draw that for you now, in just case you've forgotten your sine curves, but what we have then, if I draw on the x-axis, we have time. Apologies, my graph won't be amazing. And then if we have here, we have angle of the tilt. And if we draw 23.5 up here, there should be a point there, but it's not letting me do a point. And then minus 23.5 here, and then 0 here. If I just draw my 0 line, roughly. And like I said, it follows a sine curve. So it goes sort of like this. That'll do. I shouldn't have drawn that far ahead, but it doesn't matter. You get the point. And the peaks and troughs are your solstices. So the trough, when the northern hemisphere is furthest away from the sun, that's our winter solstice, and then the peak is our summer solstice. And what you can see is As we get closer to the solstices, whether it's the winter one or the summer one, the rate at which the angle is changing decreases, and then it levels out for a bit right around the equinox, the solstice, and then it speeds up again when you're furthest away from the solstice. And this is the equinox, so this is the spring equinox in between the winter and the summer. And so you can see around the equinox, the rate at which the angle of the tilt is relative to the sun is changing at its quickest amount. And so that's why at this time of year we're gaining, I think some parts gaining close to, well, I think it's about 3 minutes 50 seconds, 51 seconds or so each day of daylight. But from today onwards we're going to be gaining less and less daylight each day, up until the solstice, when obviously then our days will be getting shorter from that point. But that's a long way away, a few months away. Let's not worry about that for the time being. Let's just enjoy the fact that spring is here. There's some spring-like weather around at the moment. Yes, there's some wet and windy weather to come before the week's out and before we transition then into next week's high pressure. But yeah, high pressure looks pretty likely. Thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've found this deep dive interesting. If you have, share it with anyone who you think might be interested in watching any bits of it. Do leave any questions, any comments. I will be answering some of those later. Hit the like button. Always like it when you hit the like button. And as always, make sure that you are subscribed so you never miss one of our videos. Speaking of which, we do have the 10-day trend, which will be on our YouTube channel, available tomorrow on Wednesday. And like I said, we have our weekend on Thursday and our Weather Studio Live on Friday at 12:15. Otherwise, I will see you again soon. Have a lovely rest of your week, and yeah, enjoy the solar eclipse if you're able to witness it, and also enjoy the change to British summertime on Sunday morning too. Bye-bye.